Hello everyone, it's great to have you with us this evening. My name's Karen Tate, I'll be your host for the next hour. I'm a freelance journalist and editor. For the past 20 odd years I've been editing French Property News magazine, and I also contribute to titles such as the Sunday Times. I'm joined tonight by our panel of experts who are all eager to answer your questions. We've already received loads of questions, but if you want to answer any, ask any during the webinar, there's a box to the right of your screen where you can post questions there. Firstly, I'll pass over to our panelists to introduce themselves. Lisa, would you like to go first?
Yes, thanks, Karen. Hello, everybody. I work with LEGGETT International Real Estate, which is obviously an extremely large estate agency covering most of France. Over 20 years of experience for the agency and 17 years for me, so I'm a bit of a newcomer to LEGGETT. We started with very Anglo-Saxon roots, selling a lot of properties to British buyers, but over the years that's evolved. Our clientele is sort of half and half French and international buyers. We have thousands of properties on the website, lots and lots of experience with relocation amongst our agents, because many of us are British or other nationalities who've moved to France. And we specialise in hand-holding clients and offering a very high level of service.
Thanks, Lisa. Sharon?
Yes, thank you, Karen. Hi, everybody. I'm Sharon Revol. I'm a French mortgage broker. I've been a broker for the last 20 years, specialising in international and non-resident clients. I work for Cafpi. I look after the international team at Cafpi. Cafpi are French mortgage brokers, 250 branches throughout France, 1,000 brokers, all of the bank agreements, etc. And we pride ourselves in being able to offer a 360-degree solution for financing for clients, whether they be French resident or non-resident. So hopefully I'll get to answer some of your questions this evening.
Thanks, Sharon. Over to Allison.
Hi, my name is Allison Lounes. Thanks for having me this evening. I run the relocation agency Your Transformation. So we specialize in helping Anglophone clients, mostly Americans and British clients, to move to France with the right visa and to do all of the admin to set up their dream life. I also have a book, Foolproof French Visas, which is available on Amazon or on our website, which outlines the whole visa process, the different options of visas that you have. We'll answer some of those questions today, of course, and helps you to understand everything that you need to do to set up your life in France.
That's great. Thanks, Allison. And Helen?
Hi, I'm Helen Harrop. I work for the AXA International, specialised English-speaking agency for all insurance in France. I've lived in France for 11 years, having come across with my family, so been through a lot of the things that people are thinking about themselves.
That's great. And Amanda?
Oh, hi. Good evening, everybody. I'll apologise at the moment because I'm on my boat and it's a bit rocky, so I apologise in half if I suddenly disappear. I'm Amanda.Johnson. I work for the Spectrum IFA Group. We're a firm of international financial advisors throughout Europe. I'm based in the Loire Valley and also out of the Paris office. And we deal with all nationalities, helping them ensure that what they had, whether they were in America or they're in the UK, and make sure it's tax efficient and works here. And I can all currencies, all nationalities, and happy to answer any questions. So thank you for the opportunity, Karen.
Lovely, thanks, Amanda. And last but not least, Jonathan.
Good evening. Thank you, Karen. Good evening, everyone. Lumon are international property currency specialists, assisting clients moving money in and out of France and all over the world. So my name's Jonathan. I'm one of the senior trading team. I've been here for 14 of our 24 years of trading. And last year we helped clients move over £7 billion back and forth. So one of the things you like to do at this time in the webinar is just to find out a little bit more about you, the audience. So it should be a poll that's come up on your screen now, all to do with when you might be looking at buying a property in France, coming over to do some viewings. Just quite helpful to get that information. because then we can make sure some of the information we're providing this evening is relevant to those timescales. Of course, buying an overseas property doesn't happen overnight, and there's various considerations that you'll need to make depending on some of those timescales that you're considering. So thank you very much, everyone, for answering that poll. And I'm going to launch another one, more to do with the financial side of things. That's certainly where Lumon would have a little bit more sort of impact in terms of the finance side of things when you're considering currency. It's well known the currency markets can be very volatile and are moving continuously. So to try and mitigate that risk, to try and help you manage your budget, Lumon has a number of different options to help you lock in an exchange rate or sort of protect what value you do have in the market, essentially trying to, as I say, mitigate the risk, potentially things becoming a bit more expensive. So thank you very much, everyone who has answered that poll as well. And we're just going to ask one final poll, and it's about where you're joining us from today. Please confirm the panel can help with clients from all over the world, and whilst the principles, certainly when you're looking at the service that we can offer, will be the same, actually there are slight nuances depending on which jurisdiction you're in terms of local banking arrangements. You know, if you're in, say, America versus the UK, or Australia or New Zealand. So yes, again, just quite helpful for us and the panel here to get some of that information. So fantastic responses. Thank you very much, everyone, for answering those polls. And I'm going to hand back to Karen. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. So let's get stuck into some of these questions. We've had loads about visas. It's a newer thing for Brits, of course, since Brexit, but Americans and other nationalities are more well versed with it. So an excellent one for Allison to answer. Claire Bonus has asked, my main question is, how do I acquire a long stay visa?
Okay, so this is a big topic because a lot of people say long stay visa, but there are actually almost 30 different types of long stay visas. So the most important thing that you want to keep in mind is you need to understand the type of visa that you'll be applying for, mostly based on whether or not you're retired and not working, or whether or not you're self-employed or plan on working remotely, or whatever your income situation is going to be. So the first step is figuring out, based on, you know, whether or not you plan to continue to work and for whom and under what circumstances, there are a certain number of documents related to that situation that you will need to compile. If you want to be a salaried worker, for example, you need to get a work authorization, or you need to have a work contract with a company over a certain amount of money, or the company potentially needs to prove they tried to hire a French person first. So not super easy. There are visas for being self-employed, for setting up a company, for accompanying a family member, or, as I mentioned, you know, for people who are not working at all and who are just living off of their retirement savings, for example. So the very first step is to understand the type of visa that you're going to apply for. This is what our book covers in great detail. Compiling the documents, and then you need to bring all of the documents to the French, well, they're sent to the French consulate, but you go through a private company in the UK. In the UK, it's TLS Contact. In Edinburgh, Manchester, or London. In the US and Canada, it's VFS Global, and there are, I think, 4 in Canada and 10 in the 9 or 10 in the US. So you go to an in-person appointment, you submit your documents, they review it, and they issue the visa. When you arrive in France, that's then validated into a long-term titre de séjour. So, you know, first off, really think about your financial situation. It can be difficult to switch visa types. You know, if you come over with a retirement visa and then decide you want to work or be self-employed or whatever, it can be difficult to switch your visa type. It takes a long time. So really, you know, that should be one of the first questions that you're thinking about if you're planning a long-term move to France, is what's your long-term plan for staying here, and for, you know, and will you need to earn money?
Okay, lovely. Thanks, Alison. So lots to think about. And as you say, your book does go into greater detail about that. Next, let's have a buying a property question, one for Lisa. Joanne Jones says, we're planning a viewing trip in October 24 to hopefully purchase a property. When should we engage with estate agents? And somebody else also asked, what's the best way to get the most from a viewing trip? So contacting agents and viewing trips, advice on that.
Well, it's all about identifying areas, I suppose, and if they have done that, then to engage with agents as soon as possible and try and find people who you can really work with. If you're absolutely transparent about your timescale, it could well be that they have product at the moment that will not be available by the time someone came in October, but they could be sending suggestions. Is this the kind of thing that would please you? You know, if you were here now, would be this the sort of thing you were looking at, so that the agent can start to work with you about, are your expectations realistic? You know, do you have your finances in place? Do you need to speak to Lumon or Sharon, etc.? Just making sure that everything is well qualified and lined up. The agent may even have suggestions of places where you can stay, so that you start as early as possible to get the best plans in place as possible, and try to indicate exactly what kind of thing you are going to be looking for, so that by the time you do come, the agent has a good number of suggestions for you from the portfolio of themselves, their colleagues, or working on a mandat de recherche, maybe even with other agencies, so you can still get the Leggett service whilst seeing properties which are listed with others. So I think it's never too soon to start speaking to the agent and trying to drill down on the area. And then again, communication is key for making the best from a viewing trip, because the last thing you want to do is arrange to see half a dozen properties and you think, oh, you know, I'll book it the week before. Then by the time you actually reach out, those properties are under offer, sold. You find you're not going to be able to make the best use of the trip you had planned. So just putting the planning into place as early as possible, and realizing that French estate agents do work differently. If they're working correctly, they are doing far more hand-holding, accompaniment. You know, you never go to a viewing alone in France. There's always an agent with you. So realize that you are working with them. You know, it's a joint project for you to find the property you're looking for. And the more you trust them and share information with them and engage with them, the better they can help you. And the sooner you start to speak with agents, the sooner you'll find the person that you feel comfortable with and you feel that you've got that good working relationship with. And they will also be able to liaise with colleagues. So if, for instance, you're looking across the whole of a region, it may be that the particular agent you've bonded with can accompany you on all of the viewings. But if not, they can at least liaise with colleagues so that they're giving feedback. You know, we thought that Mr. and Mrs. X wanted to see this kind of property, but I've showed them several of those today. In actual fact, there is too much land, really. They have realised what a commitment that would be. So we need to just tweak the viewing schedule. Can we find things that have a little bit less? Or, you know, maybe they don't need as many bedrooms as they thought. They're realising that, you know, there is a lot more space in a French property than they had anticipated, etc. So just to keep sort of helping you make the most of that trip while you're on the ground by being within a network of agents who communicate with each other. But communicate early, communication is key, and trust the agents, because, you know, we're here to help you find the property, not just sell you any property.
Great. So never too early to contact an agent, and they can start working with you and helping you from the start, even if you're not immediately ready to go. Good idea to start building relationships. Okay, thanks, Lisa. A mortgages one for Sharon now from Isabel Herman. She wants to know, what are the conditions to get a mortgage in France? Do you need to open a bank account first? And do you need to save money in advance?
Okay, well, there's lots of answers to the question. So I will start with the last part of the question, which is about saving money. Yes, you will need to save money because you will need to put down a deposit on the property and a down payment. So as part of the mortgage, the banks won't finance you as a non-resident 100% of the property price and the purchase costs. So yes, you will need to have savings in place to cover your down payment, so the deposit on the property, but also to show your ability to pay the mortgage. you will have an extra outgoing, so to speak, on your bank account every month. So something that you'll have to pay which you're not paying now. So the banks will be very interested to see how you're actually going to manage to pay that extra amount. If you put money in savings on a regular basis, you will be demonstrating that you have that surplus cash and that you are able, therefore, to afford a mortgage. With regards to whether you need a bank account in France before you start the process, no. And Jonathan will be able to explain alternatives for what you can use for when you're viewing properties in France. But you don't actually need to have a bank account to apply for a mortgage, because the majority of French banks will actually open the bank account for you as part of the mortgage process. In terms of how mortgages work, it's a very vast question. So just in a nutshell, as a non-resident, you would normally be required to put down a 10 to 20% deposit, sometimes 30% deposit. You'll be required to cover the purchase costs. So with the costs relating to the mortgage, that's approximately 10%. It's about 7 or 8% for the notary fees, plus the the fees related to registering the mortgage and the lender's fee. So you're about 10% all in on purchase costs. So you need to have the cash. Rates here tend to be fixed rate, and generally you're about 20 years, 25 years maximum. We don't have 30 or 40-year mortgages here. So in a nutshell, those are the conditions. Afterwards, obviously everybody's situation is a bit different.
Thanks, Sharon. That was a great answer. One for Amanda now. Matt Fisher says he'll be working remotely for his UK-based company whilst living in France. What implications, if any, does it have on tax? And I have a feeling it will have some implications.
Yes, it is. So first of all, thank you, Matt, for your question. I think we need to be a little bit clearer on the fact that there is income tax in France, okay, and then there are social charges in France. And the two are different, and the two most people, everybody pays social charges, not everybody pays tax. So we need to just explain that there are two separate charges. So what he'll need to do is he'll need to complete an income tax return. So at the moment, it's around about now. It opened last week, and the French tax year goes 1st of January to the 31st of December. So, and you're always doing the year before. So for everybody completing their tax returns now, they're doing from any income they earned from the 1st of January 2023 until the 31st of December 2023. So he will need to declare his income here, but he's got a UK company, and it depends whether he's going to be an employee or classed as an employee. So the UK company will have to pay for some social charges here. Now, that's outside of my remit, but I do work with accountants here, and a French accountant will not only be able to explain which is the best way to do this, but will also set this up and automatically arrange for the payments to be sent to cover the social charges here. So there is a way, and you just need to have the right person to talk to your UK accountant and then get that set up.
Okay, yes, great. So I think an important thing to note there is for people, if they're working in France for a UK-based company, not to think they don't have to do a French tax return. They still do have to do that and go from there. Okay, lovely.
And just to jump in really fast, they need the right visa to do that, because you can't just come on any visa.
Absolutely. So whole other kettle of fish, isn't it? Working visas and how you work in France is, well, it would take up the whole hour on its own easily. So let's move on now to a currency question for Jonathan. Robbie Udberg says, what is the best way to make international money transfers?
Okay, well, there's a number of different ways that you could do this in principle, and a first port of call for a lot of people would be the bank. So that can actually prove quite costly. Lumon can demonstrate savings over the banks, and it's generally quite well documented in a lot of the sort of online guides and things you might get about buying an overseas property, to generally not to always use the bank. It's not always the best option. So yes, there's other options, to move money around. You get like your Western Unions and that kind of thing. Here, we certainly try and tailor our service very much to the actual property transaction. So there's a number of benefits and options that we can actually offer that really do suit a property transaction, as I started to mention before, in terms of how it allows you to structure really the budgeting and costs. So yeah, key thing is obviously trying to make sure you're getting a competitive rate in the market. How we can help our clients to achieve that is we buy very large volumes in bulk. We actually buy currency from a number of different sources, and that allows us to be very competitive on the rates that we're offering. It's a very sort of clear process in terms of the transaction rate. It's very transparent. We'll be quoting a final price, and there's no additional fees, costs, or charges. That's certainly something you've got to be very careful with certainly the banks and potentially other options. Any hidden fees, costs, or charges, and potentially receiving charges at the other end, particularly where since Brexit, the UK is now outside of the EU. We have seen some banks in Europe, in the EU, charging, because the UK is seen as an external part of the EU now for banking and other arrangements. Certainly a consideration for clients coming from the United States, international banking fees. So as I say, we have no transfer fees or charges, and we can guarantee no receiving fees at the other end in terms of the final amount that would credit. Other benefits with us, very much the service. The term hand-holding has been mentioned. We do mention it from time to time on these webinars, but it's extremely important with a big transfer like this. If you're moving a smaller amount of money maybe from one country to another, you may not be so focused on number one, the rate, or perhaps the service. You may not need to do a detailed foreign exchange analysis, if you're considering a few €100 for a holiday. If you're considering a few €100,000 for a property, where one rate, 1 cent or so on the rate is literally a difference of thousands of pounds, a lot of holiday money, then getting really good information about what the market is doing, as well as a competitive rate, is very important. If we look at some of the forecasts that are out there on rates, so pound euro is predicted, according to about 50 different banks that we consult, the forecast over the next 3 months is a 9-cent range. So if you were talking about, say, a €200,000 purchase, that 9 cents is quite a big difference. You could potentially looking at about sort of £16,000 difference in the actual cost of what you'd be paying between the high and the low. So even someone extremely wealthy, would probably find that extremely difficult to swallow if that was to move against you. And we never quite know what the rates are going to do. But just being able to be kept up to date with the market, with a specialist, to understand some of the options that are available to you to actually lock a rate in, I would say, and I'm sure some of the panel would agree, is extremely important, just to understand a bit more about what's going on in the market, what options are available to actually lock in a rate, and then ensure that you're using a service who, works with lots of local partners, so the estate agent in the country, the notaires, all of these things can sort of come together and just ensure a very smooth transaction. So yes, doing it in the right way is very important.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. So as with anything, when you're moving to France or buying a French property, big serious consideration, use the specialists, I think, is generally good advice. And on that subject, insurance specialist, Helen, I'm going to come over to you with a question. Somebody wants to know, they want to rent out their holiday home when they're not using it. Will their house insurance still be valid?
Yeah, there's a few things to consider, I would say, and it depends on the specific situation, like always. Generally, if it's your non-resident in France and it is your holiday home and you're renting it out, then yes, obviously you can and your insurance will remain valid, but you do need to let the insurer know. We can add a clause into the insurance to make sure you're covered. One of the things to be aware of with insurance in France is it's a multi-risk policy, not all risks. So people coming from different countries may well not be used to that. And specifically, the thing to consider there is if you have people in your home, you're renting it out to them and they cause damage to the home, your home insurance will not cover that. The home insurance will cover incidences such as climatic events, water leaks, fires, thefts, such like, but not damage caused by somebody renting your house out. So you need to be aware of that. There's things you can do. You can take a deposit, you can rent through an agency. In France, if you're resident, you have an insurance which is known as your RCVP, which is your public liability, which insures you for damage you do to somebody's property. So you can make sure you have a copy of that from somebody coming from who lives in France, or make sure that the people visiting your home have good travel insurance. So that's if you're non-resident. If you live in France and you're renting out your property or part of your property, then it may depend on if you're considering it for, depending on if your income, and then it may need to be insured in a different way. And there are ways of insuring the property that can protect your income in the event of a fire and such like and things like that. So yes, you can insure your property, it can be covered, but just be aware and make sure that you consider all angles.
That's great. Thanks, Helen. That's really useful information. So we touched upon working visas before. So here's one for Allison. Tim Ware wants to know, is it easier to get a retirement visa or a working visa? He says, I will not need to work, but can set up a company if needed. And somebody else was asking, how do I know what's the right visa type for moving to France, which is related?
Sure. So, I mean, the right visa is really relative to what your long-term goals are. So I would say that in terms of like the number of documents you need to provide for the visa application, sure, the retirement visa is easier in the sense that it has the fewest amount of documents. You just have to prove basically that you're self-supporting, and that, you know, you have a place to stay, and it's very basic in terms of the documents that you're going to be providing. However, it's fairly complicated to switch from a retirement or a visitor visa to a visa type that allows you to work. If you do decide at some point that you want to take up your freelancing activity, or you want to open a company, or you want to go out and get a job. So I personally advise that the easiest visa type to get is the one that is right for your situation. Now, in terms of setting up a company, there are 3 different visa types that are appropriate. We primarily work with 2 of them, because the third one I consider it's not a very good option. There's the self-employment visa, which is Profession Libérale Auto-Entrepreneur, and that is if you're a freelancer, you're earning under 77,000 euros per year. You don't necessarily have a lot of expenses. You put together a business plan, you show that your business activity is going to be viable, and then you're able to invoice people or companies anywhere in the world as a self-employed person. Now, if you want to set up an actual French company, you know, you can go over the 77,000 euro limit. There are a couple of different company structures where you're either paying yourself a salary or you're getting dividends. It's a lot easier to sort of optimize your income in that way. And there are 2 basic visa types for setting up a French company. One is a classic entrepreneur visa, where there's no minimum investment, there's no minimum education, but you do need to get approval from DREETS, which is the Direction Régionale of all kinds of things. I forget the rest of the acronym, but basically, de l'emploi, de something else, du travail, I don't know. And basically, like, they sort of evaluate your business plan compared to the region where you want to be setting up, and is it a viable business for that region, and do they approve of giving you a work authorization to run that business. Now, the other option, which is the one that we tend to favor and our clients tend to favor, is the talent passport entrepreneur. which has two main requirements. One is that you either have 5 years of professional experience or a master's degree, and two, that you're making a 30,000 euro investment in the startup capital of the company, which means you're putting the money into an escrow account. Then that money goes into, you know, your company's assets when you arrive in France, register your business, etc. You can use that money for business expenses. You're not paying it out to anybody. But the advantage to that is that you're also getting a 4-year carte de séjour right off the bat, instead of, you know, getting a 1-year visa that then you have to renew at the end of the first year. So there are a lot of advantages to having that talent passport status. Running a company can be complex and expensive. I'm not familiar with how, you know, company accounting in the UK, for example, but I know for our American clients, it can be a little bit of a shock, like how procedural and how much of a protocol there is for running a business and doing the accounting and the bookkeeping and all of that stuff. So it's certainly it can be a significant learning curve and complicated. If you're not planning on earning a lot of money, it may be easier to just go the auto entrepreneur route. But again, those three options are really, you know, you're really gonna want to think about, like, if you want to work and if you want to have clients or be self-employed or whatever. I would say it's much better to go for those visa types from the beginning rather than try to change after being on a retirement visa.
So have a really good think about what you want to do and then seek advice on the route forward. Thanks, Allison. One for Lisa now on buying property. Paul Knight says, fees, who pays what and what are the best options? And we also hear a lot from people who want to know what the price advertised on estate agents' listings involves, what it includes, and what other costs there are when they're buying a home, as well as the fees.
Any property which is advertised will almost certainly be advertised FAI or HAI, frais d'agence inclus, or honoraires d'agence inclus, which means the agency fees are included. It doesn't really concern the buyers too much which way the mandate of sale is written. They can be written at the charge of the vendor, they can be written at the charge of the buyer. But basically the fees, the agency fees, are all wrapped up in the advertised price of the property. And there will be transparency on the percentage and the level of fees if they are at the charge of the buyer. If they're at the charge of the vendor, they've already been added into the price of the property. So they're already being paid effectively by the person who will bring the price, the money to the table for the property and the fees included. So that's the biggest part of the cost. And as I say, there's full transparency on that because that's on all of the advertised prices. And then the other main cost, of course, is what's referred to as notaire fees, which is not all just money going into the notaire's pocket. Obviously, they're a quasi-governmental officer collecting money for the state. So they're collecting money for various departmental and national reasons. And their conveyancing costs, their actual sort of professional fee, is just part of the money they collect, which is usually around, if you allow 8% on an average property, when you're looking at a property for sale, if, for instance, it's advertised at 100,000, including agency fees, if you think, well, I've got to find another 8,000 for the notaire's fees, that should be okay. If it's 200k property, obviously you allow 16,000. It won't be exactly that, and the percentage is variable depending on the department and the type of property and certain circumstances, but that's just a really broad rule of thumb that should stop you having any nasty shocks. And people are always asking, are there any hidden costs? Are there any hidden costs? Well, no, not hidden. Obviously, if you want to have utilities supplied to the property, there'll be some small account opening costs. You've got to get the property insured. You're sensible to get the property insured, so there's a cost of insurance, but that's not really what you would call a hidden cost. If you're taking a mortgage, it may be that there's a charge going to be registered on the property, but you know, you'll be made fully aware of that in your mortgage quotation. So there are no other sort of side swipe costs that people suddenly think, oh, am I going to get a bill for something really, really unexpected? But no, they're really only bills for things which are normal things to do with moving house, you know, taking out an internet subscription, getting electricity, paying the conveyancing fees, which is notaire fees, which is all of the purchase taxes. That's all wrapped up in that 8% that I discussed. So who pays it all? Well, the buyer brings the money to the table, as I say, for the property, the agency fees and the notaire fees. So they're all at the charge of the buyer in reality. Technically, it can be written slightly differently, that some of it is at the charge of the vendor, but really you're bringing it all to the table when you see that advertised price.
So that's pretty, it should be pretty reassuring for people looking to buy a property, because basically the price you see advertised is the price you pay. You're not going to have agency fees then added onto the top of that, but buyers should budget for the 8%-ish notaire fees, which, as you say, includes some of these taxes like stamp duty and stuff. Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks,
and when
Lisa.
they move to compromise, of course, when they sign the initial contract, all of that is listed within it. So that's a really strong point of the consumer protection situation, that all of that is listed in the compromise, so they know from the outset when they sign the compromise and agree to go ahead, it's all there. And at the time of the closing, that's the amount in the compromise that they have to make sure is at the notaire's office on that day of closing. Again, there's no nasty surprises. It's all there in black and white. You sign the compromise or you don't.
Yeah, the French system is very well regulated, isn't it? Okay, moving on to a mortgage question for Sharon. Chandel Combs says, how difficult is it to find a mortgage lender for Americans looking to make a permanent move? And I'd imagine there's plenty of Brits wanting to ask the same question.
Okay, well, thank you for the question. If I can just bounce off of just on going to the agency fees, which Lisa was explaining, if they just, it's important from a mortgage perspective, just to add that if they are to be paid for by the buyer, we can't include them in the mortgage, so they need to be financed on top of the deposit. But again, Lisa, as she said, we detail all of that with them, so it's not a surprise as well. So it's part of the discussion. But to go back to the question, I just wanted to add that, sorry. But to go back to the question, it really depends what's going to happen to your income when you move to France. So if you're moving to France because you found employment in France, your income will be coming from French sources, depending on your situation, kind of your work contract, you know, what's in place financially, we may be able to treat you 100% as a French resident. If you are moving to France and your income and everything is still remaining non-resident, i.e. from abroad, then the banks will probably treat you as a non-resident, whether you're American, British or whatever. There are certain circumstances where we may be able to obtain a mortgage similar to a resident mortgage, so the differences being mainly the deposit required and the interest rates. They're the main differences between non-resident and resident mortgages. It will really depend on your individual situation, and sometimes it can be such a slight difference, such as you have a utility bill already in France. It might be a mobile phone bill, and then we can treat you as a resident. It really is that subtle, which is why it's important to really speak to us early on in the process. With regards to American citizens, people have experienced in the past, because of FATCA regulations, we're experiencing it with the British at the moment with Brexit, that there is some difficulty with certain banks. Not all banks will lend to Brits, not all banks will lend to Americans. So afterwards, it's a question of navigating the banking system, which is what I do with my team on a daily basis to make sure that we're able to put you in touch with the right banks and find the right solutions for you straight away. You may hear that, oh no, Americans can't get mortgages, or oh, I'm a Brit, I need to be a high net worth individual to be able to get a mortgage. It's not the case for the whole French mortgage market, so there are solutions. So whether you're becoming non-resident, resident, or you know, every case is different, and as I said, it's the differences can be very subtle. So I hope I've answered the question. Sorry, it's a difficult one to answer.
No, that's great. Thanks very much, Sharon. So another one relating to non-residents for Amanda. Robert Franz, he asks, what are the taxes for non-residents? Now, he doesn't say anything about his situation. He may or may not have a property in France, but presumably he means he's spending lots of time in France, but not living there, not tax resident.
I think, yeah, I think the big one on that is we need to look at, obviously there's property taxes. So if you were buying, you know, Lisa and one of the Leggett agents would go through, you know, what the equivalent of like rates were in the UK. Gosh, that's going back a bit, isn't it? I mean, at least I didn't say poll tax, but you know, sort of there'll be some kind of property tax that would need to be paid. And as I say, Lisa and her team would have to show you what that is, so you're aware of that. But if we talk about income tax, the only time that you would have to complete a tax declaration form here, even as a non-resident, would be if you were generating some income here. So let's say, for example, that you bought a property and then you decided that you're going to rent it out for holidays to friends or family, and they were paying you. Well, then that income is being generated here, and as such, that will need to be declared here. So, and there could well be some taxes on that. But I think, you know, with Robert's question, it's a little bit, we need a bit more information on that one.
Okay.
But, yeah. Hope that helps.
That's fine. Thanks, Amanda. That does help, I'm sure. In terms of property, if you've got a holiday home in France, there is council tax in effect to pay on it. There's two taxes, the taxe d'habitation and the taxe foncière, which they'd be liable for. But as you say, when you buy a property, the estate agent will explain that to you as well. And it's always worth reading up before you buy the property anyway. And reading French property news, of course. There's lots of information in there. So anyway, moving on to Jonathan. A currency question. People get very confused, I think, because they hear all this talk of different contracts with currency. So what is a forward contract?
Okay, thank you, Karen. Yeah, so a forward contract is essentially a foreign exchange contract where you lock in the rate for today for payment in the future. So you buy it forward, if you like. You lock in the rate today, you don't have to pay until the future. So we would use one of these contracts really to manage the FX risk, because by locking in the rate at the moment, you're guaranteeing what it's going to be in the future. So the forecast of the next 3 months on pound euro is about 9 cents movement between the high and the low. As we mentioned earlier, that could cause real issues with your budget. If we look at dollar euro, euro dollar, the forecast there is 11 cents movement between the high and the low over the next 3 months. So again, could play real havoc with your budgets. So you've got two main options in terms of locking in the rate. I talked about that at the beginning, you know, buying your currency so you know what it's going to cost you. You know, you don't know what a foreign property is going to cost you essentially until you buy the currency. It's an unknown. You might think, oh, the rate's probably going to stay where it is, or it might go up or down a little bit, but literally until you've bought that currency, you really don't know what it's actually going to be costing you. So you have the wallet functionality where you can just buy now. You'd pay for all of the currency up front. It's called a spot deal. You'd normally have 2 working days to settle on that. And that's, so you'd pay all of the money up front, and then you buy the euros, you own them, and they sit in this, we call it a wallet. It's like an escrow account, a euro bank account, a client account. It's a Lumon account, but it's a client account, so it remains your money. But yes, that would be a spot deal. You'd pay for it now. And then you've got this forward contract, say it's like a future contract in the FX markets, a forward contract where you're locking in the rate today for payment in the future. So that would be really utilized where maybe you don't have all of the money available. You might be selling a property in the UK or the United States or wherever you're moving from, or you may have, say, your money invested. FTSE 100 in the UK went up to an all-time high last Friday, so you might have your money invested in the stock market and think, fantastic, that's really, really good, I'm going to keep my money there, but oh, I've just agreed a deal with Lisa, you know, she just found me a lovely property I'm going to be buying over there. You know, what can I do about the foreign exchange? So you could keep your money invested in the stock market in that scenario, but at least lock in the rate, so you know exactly. Let's just say it was £100,000. Deposit is typically 5 or 10%. So you'd lodge that deposit with us, let's just call it 5%, so £5,000. And then typically a French property is about 3 months from the compromis de vente to the acte de vente, the final payment. So yes, we'd then say, right, in 3 months' time, you have to pay us £95,000. That, of course, would bring it up to the 100 in total, and you'd be able to draw down on those euros at that exact rate you've locked it in at. So you're just guaranteeing the rate. Did have your money invested in the stock market at those lovely highs and it's gone up higher, you're not then going to risk, oh great, I pull out my money from the stock market, but oh no, the currency rates have plummeted 3 or 4 cents and you're just going to lose all those lovely gains. So yes, a forward contract, it's an agreement to lock in today's rate for payment in the future, and it's very important to be aware of it for a foreign property transaction because of the timescales involved and the volatility of the currency markets.
Okay, great. I like that a forward contract is like a future contract. That's a good way to get it clear in your head.
Yes,
Okay,
just to cut in there quickly, Karen, there is a futures contract which is slightly different, but it's very much the same principle and agreement to pay it in the future, hence being called a futures contract. But a forward is slightly different. Happy to talk to anyone about it, but the principles are absolutely the same. Just to be pernickety there in case there's any finance bods watching who may pull me up on that.
Absolutely, we don't want to confuse people. So one for Helen now, an insurance one. Do I need health insurance if I become a resident in France? So is it obligatory or should you have it?
Oh, it's a tricky one, isn't it, that? Yes, I think when you first come to France, you're legally obliged to have insurance, and we're talking private insurance here. And there is some confusion because once you have a social security number, that will also be called health insurance because it's assurance maladie. So there is going to be some confusion for people, and it is confusing. If you're applying for a visa, then you are legally obliged to have health insurance of some kind or health cover. I think if you come to France and you can come and live here, you have EU nationality and you can come to France, you might not be checked on it, but there is a legal requirement to have a health insurance in place. And I would always recommend you have something in place, at least for accidents and emergencies. Then once you live here, depending on your circumstances, you can then apply for a French social security number. Now, once you have cover under the French system, you're not legally obliged to have any supporting insurance, but I would say, like many of the situations we've covered here today, have a conversation with a specialist about that before you make the decision either way, whether you decide to go with just social security cover, because the French system does not cover all health costs, and you can have a supplementary or top-up insurance. As I say, it's not a legal requirement. You don't have to have one of those. What you do have to do is have a private insurance in place before you have a French social security number so that you are covered. But as I say, have a conversation with somebody who knows the system well and can understand how it works, explain it to you, and make sure that you've considered those risks properly before you decide to have or not have a mutual top-up policy is what I would recommend.
That's great. Thanks, Helen. Allison, a visa question from Carl Seal, which this comes up a lot. He says, how much income do I need to show per month to acquire a resident permit, as we would like to move permanently to France? But all the visas have these sort of income requirements, don't they?
Yeah. So if you're looking at a visitor visa, the requirement is to have net SMIC. So SMIC is the salaire minimum de croissance, the French minimum wage, which gross is about 1,767 euros per month, and it works out to about 1,400 euros net. So ideally, at the time of your visa application, again, for a retirement visa, you're not working at all, you want to have 1,400 euros per month, either in cash, it works out to just under 17,000 euros, or if you can show that you have a regular deposit of a pension and then every single month you're getting a pension of 1,400 euros or more, that also works. Now that amount is actually good for a couple and up to 3 family members. So if you have, you're all living together and you're a couple with 1 child, the 1,400 euros would be sufficient. Then it goes up at about 10 to 15% for each additional family member that you have. Now, if you're planning on working, what you're going to be showing, if you're self-employed, for example, you want to show that you have gross income of at least French minimum wage. So if you're self-employed, you want to show that you're going to have, work that will bring you at least about 1,800 euros per month from your self-employment income. If you're going to be running a business, you want to show that you're going to be able to pay yourself a salary or profits from the company totaling at least, 1,800 euros gross. Again, gross is before social charges that Amanda talked about earlier. If you are applying for a salaried worker visa, so there are different levels of salaried worker visas depending on whether or not you have a master's degree, how much experience you have, and whether or not you have a degree in a French university. So if you're under, if you have a master's or 5 years of professional experience, you're earning more than 54,000 euros roughly in gross salary, then you can get a talent passport. If you're under that amount, then you either have to have a French master's degree or you have to, master's degree from an actual French university, or the company has to prove that they tried to hire somebody who already had the ability to work in France, were unable to find that person, and so they get work authorization to sponsor you as their employee. And then in that case, you could have a salary as low as French minimum wage, SMIC, or up to that 54,000 euros that is the threshold for getting the talent passport and not requiring the work authorization. So I always advise people to have that minimum of 1,400 per month, regardless of the visa type. Even if you're applying to be self-employed, just to show that you're not going to be homeless and destitute on the street if you don't have any clients for the first couple of months or whatever. But then for work visas, it does vary based on what you're going to do.
Okay, that's great. That's good to know that. I think we can fit in one last question, a quick one for Lisa from Troy Luther. He's looking for a holiday home with a view to it becoming a retirement home, while Ruby J says, is it possible to find a property to rent out and spend some time there through the year? So I guess that's general advice on buying a holiday home and spending some time there, maybe renting it out and retiring later.
Obviously, there are 2 very common scenarios that people do buy a home with a view to retire to it later. Some, it's always just only going to be a holiday home. I suppose you've got to consider your own requirements for a holiday home because you're going to be using it yourself. But more strongly consider them if it's going to ultimately become a retirement home. So if you want to be able to rent it out, clearly you would look for it to be close to some tourist attractions or transport links. So factoring in what you like to do and what you think other people are going to want to do. If there's plenty to do in the area, that's going to make it possible for you to get rentals. But if it's going to be something that you want to become a permanent home, making sure it's large enough so that you don't have to move again unless you would like to just have a foot on the French property ladder and then maybe move to something larger later. But considering how you're going to get pleasure out of it and how you're going to be able to use it obviously is a really, really big factor. And that has to be the driving factor unless you definitely do want to be able to generate income, and then you would think far more about what other people will be attracted to in the property. So I hope that answers it, but obviously there's just such a huge array of choices of properties for people to have as holiday homes, and sometimes people do buy 5-bedroom homes with 2 hectares of land for a holiday home, and other people it's just sort of a 1-bed fisherman's cottage. People just have such an enormous different need, choices, preferences. Some of them are desperate for the whole family to be able to come and stay. Some of them definitely want 1 bedroom, so nobody can come and stay. So, and transport is something to really think about. If you can be close to an airport that serves your home area or where you want to attract visitors from, if it can be close to a ferry port, if people are going to be coming on the ferry, why not buy within half an hour of the ferries rather than hours and hours from the ferries? Or it might be that you want to buy in a ski region or on the south coast. Just so much potential. So it's where you think you will get the most benefit from it is obviously
Absolutely.
where you can see yourself living if it's going to become a permanent home with good services close to you. And if it's about using it just 3 or 4 weeks a year yourself and then income generation the rest of the time, maybe sacrifice your own preferences for the commercial preferences of potential holidaymakers.
That's great. Thanks, Lisa. So think it through well, how you're going to use it yourself and how you may want other people to use it before you buy it, and enjoy your lovely holiday home. That's what it's all about. We're coming up to the end of the webinar now. That hour has flown by, but don't worry, there's going to be another one on the 28th of May. So if you want to register for that, you'll receive details after this by email after this webinar. You'll also receive a recording of the webinar, which is really handy if you've missed anything or you want to listen to bits again. Sorry if we didn't get to your questions. We did have more than we had time to answer, but all our panelists' details are there on the screen in front of you now, and they're all happy for you to get in touch and ask any questions. So thank you so much for joining us. I'll just hand over to the panelists. They're going to say their farewells. So over to Lisa. Do you want to go first?
Thank you, Karen. Yes. Obviously, you've got my email address there. I'm more than happy to answer any questions I can or put you in touch with a colleague at Leggett who I think can help you better than me or in a different region. And would just advise anybody who's been thinking about a French property project and not been sure to just do it, because it's a very safe place to buy. It's very protected and it's a beautiful place to live, or at least spend some time.
Absolutely. Beautiful, beautiful France. Sharon?
Yes, thank you very much for having me this evening. It's been a pleasure as always. I always learn lots of new things, especially about visas. Everything's evolving a lot. I know that there were some other questions about mortgages. French mortgages are very complex, so do feel free to get in contact. Planning is key. There's no silly question, so do feel free. My contact details at the bottom of the screen. It will either be me or one of the team that will help you, but everybody's case is different, so it's impossible, to answer all different scenarios. So thank you very much, and hopefully see everybody again soon.
Thanks, Sharon. And over to Allison.
Yeah, lots of great questions on visas today. So I just would advise you that if you are thinking especially of not just applying for the retirement visa, there is our book, Foolproof French Visas, that's available on Amazon as a paperback and on our website as an ebook. It really walks you through the whole visa process step by step, from choosing the right visa, understanding why you would choose one visa over the other, working remotely, etc. And it covers everything in excruciating detail. So thank you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to give you a little preview in some of the questions today. And please do get in touch if you need further help.
Sounds like some good bedside reading there then for everyone.
It may help put you to sleep. It may help put you to sleep. It is, yeah.
I'm sure not. Helen, over to you.
Hi, thanks for having me. And I'm aware insurance is not the most interesting thing in the world, although I think your book's really interesting, Allison, but I'm not sure I'm the best person to say that. What I would just finish on is just reinforcing what a lot of my colleagues here have said today, which is being in France is amazing, but there's a lot of differences, and some of those differences you're not even going to know what you're looking for. Just make sure you speak to a specialist, have that chat and talk to people. We're all happy to talk about living here and what it means to us and how we can help you. So, don't be afraid to make contact and we can have that chat.
That's really great. And Amanda, on your boat?
Okay, so what I was going to say was thank you again. Thank you for having me. It makes it sound like I've been to someone's for tea, doesn't it? Thank you for having me. And there were loads of questions that we didn't get through. My top tip would be no question is too silly. It's never too early to ask. You've got everybody's details there. My inbox is always available, so drop me an email and I can answer any questions that you may well have, and hopefully make that move to France the dream that we all made. So yeah, do it.
And thank you for joining us too, Amanda. You're very polite. And finally, over to Jonathan.
Well, Karen, thank you very much for hosting. Wonderful as always, and a big thank you to our panelists. Again, really useful information. I think the key message from all of us is speak to the specialists. You know, it's like anything in your life, anything important. You know, if you're ill, you'd go to the doctor. You know, you want legal advice, you go to a lawyer, and we're all specialists on our own individual areas, so definitely worth a conversation with us. And certainly the currency side of things, yeah, very important time in the markets this year. We've got UK and US elections coming up later in the year. A lot of talk about interest rates. I could also probably put a few people to sleep with some of the currency information that we could share. But no, we try and make things nice and simple and straightforward and very accessible for people. But yeah, thank you very much everyone for joining, and so thank you again to you, Karen, for hosting.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us, and hopefully we will see you again next time. Bye now.